Ms. Lori Holden. Lori is an active blogger and the author of The Open-Hearted Way to Open Adoption, which is a great tool for both agencies and families. Lori also writes for the Huffington Post and is a regular columnist for the Denver Post MileHighMamas.com. Parenting Magazine calls her blog a must-read, and Adoptive Families Magazine has named her a top blogger. She's also an active reviewer for Path to Parenthood and is frequently called upon to be a guest for radio and television. More importantly, she is a fantastic mother to 2 children that were adopted as infants and are now 13 and 15. So we can easily say that she has plenty of experience on this topic. Lori has helped us with several fantastic webinars, and we are no less excited to have her here presenting for us again. So Lori, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, as always, and I will let you take over from here.
Wonderful, Deborah. Thank you so much. And everyone who's tuned in, thank you for making this a priority in your morning. I'm really excited about what we're covering because I am living in the middle of it and because you're going to benefit from other people who have been through this. I want to start out by saying that this webinar is geared specifically towards embryo adoption situations, but it also has a lot in common with traditional adoptions, as well as third-party reproduction like donor egg and donor sperm. So no matter which of those reasons you're here for, you're going to get some new ideas. I want to ask you to start thinking about when do you think would be the time to begin parenting your teen? If you're thinking that it's on the eve of their 13th birthday or somewhere to the right of this picture, I would encourage you to say back up. I think the day that you start parenting your teen is the day you bring your baby home and you're starting to lay the foundation of your guidance system, of how you make your decisions. Early snowflake babies are teenagers now, and you are in the enviable position of having their experiences available to you as you plot your course from this moment on. And it's never too late to start preparing, or too early to start thinking about your child as a teenager. I know that's really hard to do when you have a little baby in your arms or a toddler toddling around, but they will grow up and they will become teenagers, whether we want them to or not. I'm going to start here with the premise of the book that I wrote with my daughter's birth mom. Says this: adoption creates a split between a person's biology and their biography, and openness is a way to heal that split. So openness now is essential and not optional. It's coming whether we want it to or not. All families need to be ready to understand and support their future teenagers in integrating their biology and their biography as they do the hard work that teenagers do, answering the question, who am I? Now, the internet has made searching for people incredibly simple by closed adoption standards, and advances in DNA testing, along with the connectability of the internet, means that if people want to find, they are likely to be able to. Or, whether they choose to or not, they may end up being the searched for and found one. I'm sure that you've started hearing about people finding other people via cousin hits on Ancestry.com and 23andMe and other such sites. So openness is coming whether we want it to or not. Getting ourselves ready for this openness, breaking out of this closed mindset in the era that preceded us, this is our task as we parent by adoption, traditional or embryo. So what are some likely conversations that you need to be ready to have, and how do you get yourself ready to have them? Before we get into those, we're going to look at 8 fundamental concepts that you need to start thinking about as soon as possible. Today is a good day for that. So the first fundamental concept is about truth. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. So you need to realize that if you want trust from your kiddo, and you do, especially as a teenager, you need to give truth. Giving truth leads to receiving truth, and the opposite is true as well. If you're not delivering truth, you probably can't expect that from your teens. We can't expect them to let us into their truth if we've modeled for them anything less. One snowflake mom says this: now that my daughter is older, I can see significant differences between families who did and those who didn't receive education about openness and truth on the front end. We were counseled to tell our child her story from the very beginning. I'm surprised how many other snowflake families have approached me and said they'd always wanted what I have with my daughter. I think to myself, it starts at the beginning. You can't start on a lie and expect a high level of closeness. Those are really powerful words. Time and time again, we hear late discovery people. These are people who discover later in life that they're not who they thought they were, that they're not genetically connected to the people they thought they were. We hear them say that they feel betrayed by secrecy, and it rocks their foundation to find out that everything that they thought was true about themselves was not, and that their parents were complicit in keeping the truth from them. They can end up having difficulty forming trusting relationships with others as a result of that breach that they had with their parents. Now, nobody means to keep their kids' truth from them, but it can be too easy to plan to have an uncomfortable conversation someday and then never get around to it because, really, what holiday is called someday? If you keep waiting to have it, and if there's nothing to trigger having that conversation, it may just never happen. So age appropriately, you need to continually be turning over the story to your baby, to your child, to your tween, to your teenager. So how to begin telling early on? We recommend that you start as early as possible. You need to start giving your child's story to your child. And like I said, baby time isn't too early. That makes it sound kind of ridiculous. Why would we say that? Well, in those baby years, the telling of the story is more for your benefit than for your child's. It's for you to get comfortable telling and to work out the kinks that you may have. So I'm going to give you a couple of possibilities of ways you can say this. And of course, you're going to say it in your own way. But here's what you might say to your baby. We were so happy the day we became pregnant with you. We are grateful to the people who made you possible. Their names are George and Judy. Pretty simple. You can add things in when they're a young school child. You might say something like this. Oh, you remember George and Judy, the people who created you and who arranged for you to grow in me? Well, they live in Chicago. There's a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister. And then later on, as an older school child, you can keep building. We really wanted to have children, but we needed to get some help because we were missing some of the things you need to make a baby. Some special people had an extra embryo. That's what's created when a woman's egg and a man's sperm meet. And we were able to place that embryo, which became you, into mom's uterus. I am a fan of using the actual words. I would close then with this. We are so grateful to those special people for creating you and enabling you to grow with us. So those are just some really easy ways that you add in the depth of the details as you go, and you kind of connect back to what you've already told. And as the child gets older, these conversations are inevitably going to lead to having the sex talk. I'm sorry to tell you that, because that's hard too. So get comfortable. The more comfortable and matter-of-fact you can be about adoption stories and sex talk, the more clearly the message is going to be received. So the takeaway from our first point is give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because that's what you want to get back. We'll go on to the second point, and this is about ownership of the story. Now, we call it a story, and who owns it? Especially because of the way snowflake families are formed, we might be tempted to keep the story to ourselves. After all, infertility treatments are invasive, and we deserve some privacy after enduring all of that, right? And it's our story. We can do what we want with it, right, if it's our story. But you need to understand early on that your story overlaps with your son's or your daughter's. Their story is theirs, and you need to give it to them, all of it, over time. We hear in the traditional adoption community that adoptive parents are afraid of the knowing, while the adopted person is afraid of the not knowing. So we really need to orient more on the child's needs rather than our fears. So the takeaway on this one is to make a plan to turn over the entire story by the start of adolescence. And you can see through the conversations I shared with you a minute ago that that's kind of the steps that you take as they cognitively grow. There's lots of ways that you can add in details as you know that they're ready to deal with them. So the third point, what gets in the way of us having these conversations? I'll tell you what it is. It's working through your own stuff. And what is that stuff? Well, a lot of it boils down to shame or insecurity about the lack of genetic connection. Sometimes we have feelings about this, and that's okay. It's perfectly understandable to want to claim your child as genetic. But to actually do so, well, that just would not be truthful. And in making the claim, you'd be denying what is true. I define openness as when we deal with what is, and the alternatives to that are to deal in fantasy or to not deal at all. And neither of those options serve our kiddos better than accepting what is. If a parent carries either shame or insecurity, which are completely understandable emotions, the most helpful course about those is to resolve those emotions, to examine them, bring them into the light, and work on letting them go. A lot of times just the examining helps do that. It's the keeping them down and hiding them. That's what keeps them from being resolved a lot of times. A good therapist can help resolve shame around infertility or insecurity about not being the real parent or the only parent. And there are lots of resources available online as well. When parents resolve their own issues, it's also a win for the child and you. Wouldn't it be great to have a fewer issues to walk around with? Another thing that can keep us from working through our own stuff is, and having these conversations, is coming from an either-or mindset. If you've read any of my writings or attended a previous webinar of mine, you know that I advocate for moving from an either-or mindset that comes from the closed adoption era toward a both-and heart set that kind of brings all those pieces together for the child. We're coming out of the age in which a child could have only one legitimate set of parents, and that's really good news for the child. Any extra parent in that old mindset had to be negated or denied, and that doesn't serve a snowflake child very well at all. An either-or mindset negates either the child's biology or his biography. The biology is the DNA that we're born with, and the biography is a life that's written by the people we call family. Both of those are a part of the child. We don't want to be negating or denying either of them. We want to be accepting and embracing both sides. A both-and heart set is one solution, and it's not that difficult to make the switch in yourself so that your child has that expansive space to do all of this processing. A third thing that gets in our way is completely understandable as well. Fear of not knowing what to say, not knowing the words, not knowing how to help the child process the news. But the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center is here to help. It has amassed a huge library of resources, adding in new information all the time. So besides this webinar, I encourage you to check out other offerings on the Embryo Adoption Awareness website and understand that the best delivery comes when we've resolved our own triggers in telling the story regarding shame, regarding insecurity, regarding the either-or mindset, regarding confusion, anything like that. We work it through in ourselves. And make sure you understand that as time goes on, the news does not get easier and easier to deliver. It gets harder and harder to deliver and also to receive. So the takeaway here is resolve your own issues so that your child has the sense that there's nothing he can't share with you, nothing she can't wonder about in your presence, and no journey you won't accompany them on. Work on your own stuff. All right, let's go on to number 4. On the flip side of secrecy is privacy. We do need to deliver the entire story to the kiddo, but we're under no obligation to tell the other soccer moms or the dry cleaner, the barista, or those are maybe some things that I did in the early days when I was so excited and I had no filter. We protect their story and we offer it only with intention to those whom we want to know. And how do we know who we want to know it? Well, we pause and we ask ourselves so that we are being intentional with our disclosure. Here are 3 questions that you can ask yourself before you squeeze the toothpaste tube of the story. And I'm sure you can understand why I'm using the toothpaste metaphor, because once it's out, it doesn't go back in. So the first question to ask yourself is, does this person need to know? This answer could be yes for many reasons. It could also be no for many reasons. And the point isn't that a yes means you do this and a no means you do that. It means you just think it through. Second question, why are you wanting to tell? What's your motivation? Is it to help your child in some way? Or maybe it's to feel special yourself. That's a lot of times when I was coming from, when I was spilling to the barista. I'm not saying that either of those is good or bad. I'm saying again that the point is to think it through and examine your motivations. Third question, think long term. Might there be any repercussions from telling, not just immediate, but in 5, 10, or 15 years? Take a moment to think it through from your son's or your daughter's perspective and not just your own. So the key here is to make intentional disclosures and not to accidentally let things slip. You might do that once in a while, be gentle with yourself, move on, learn something, and decide what you would do differently when it comes up again. While you're figuring this out, your son or daughter is taking cues from you on how to deal with curiosity and questions from others too. Here's something that a snowflake parent has told us. What has surprised me about our story is how protective I have become concerning the adoption process. Now that my kids are older, I see that it truly is their story, and I want them to get to decide the who and the what and what information is shared. Now, you also need to teach your kiddo about maintaining privacy, because as you know, once you start having the sex talk and some of these other talks, they might go tell other kids without really knowing what is and isn't appropriate. So as you are delivering the story to them, you're going to have conversations with them as well, teaching them what is a private matter and what do we share outside the family. And let's talk first before we do those things. So you're showing them, you're modeling for them how to do it, and you're counseling them along the way. So the takeaway here for number 4 is to be intentional with your disclosures to others and show your child how to make privacy discernment. Our 5th fundamental concept has to do with age and stage and time. I want you to be careful not to lock your kiddo into a certain way of dealing with her identity. What doesn't matter to her at age 8 might become a thing at age 13. So don't ever think you kind of have a handle on this, because it's bound to change. And we need to give our kiddos the freedom to go through their own stages of development and process their origin story. A snowflake mother tells about her son's evolving attitude toward his genetic family. There are often some ins and outs, and it's, as you can see from her report, it's not always a linear process for him. When he was younger, our son was really excited about the idea of seeing his genetic parents. They had last met when he was 2. He loved looking at pictures and reading letters from them beforehand, and things looked really positive, but the meeting got postponed indefinitely due to a car wreck. As our son got older, his interest receded. He vocalized some concerns about meeting his genetic parents because he felt we were his parents. We were open with the donors about his concerns, and they have been so supportive throughout. The donor family eventually asked if our son would be okay with emailing directly, which eased him into things and made him feel more comfortable. That went on for 6 or 7 emails back and forth, and then he lost interest in emailing. But that bridge offered the encouragement he needed to again want to meet them. His genetic family has never pushed him to go beyond his comfort level. The bottom line is, and I love this bottom line is that we all meet him wherever he is. So on an ongoing basis, we want to walk that happy medium line between denying his story and dwelling on it. And this requires attunement, moment-to-moment attunement. The takeaway here is that the way your child processes his origins is likely to change over time. Stay attuned so that you know at any stage what she needs from you, to talk or not to talk. Sometimes it'll be one and sometimes it'll be the other. Our 6th fundamental point I call the dance, because this means sometimes you're leading and sometimes you're following. Isn't this a lovely picture? Thanks for this, Deborah. When we're approaching the conversations that we're about to talk about, sometimes the parents lead and sometimes they follow. Sometimes we best serve with carefully considered words and ideas, and sometimes we best serve with our silence and our attention. Continually, we check in, we attune, like I've been talking about, and like this snowflake parent is saying she has done. When our son was 6, she says, we had a conversation where I offered to show him pictures and give him other information. I still remember him saying, I kind of do want to see it, Mom, and I kind of don't. And that was it. I waited a while for him to bring it up, and he never did. He has always known the details of his story because I told him very early, and he's heard it through so many conversations we've had, that he is not the proactive participant in the conversation. A couple of years ago when he was 13, he agreed to look at the pictures and read the information his genetic family had sent before he was born. He got interested that day because his younger siblings had become more curious about their own stories, leading to a big discussion on genetic siblings and looking at Facebook pictures. Every kid is so different. I have 4, and they're not a thing alike. So again, you can see this mom is pretty good at tuning in not only to the time, but also the different kiddo. She's not using a one-size-fits-all standard when she's dealing with these issues. Oops, okay. As your emerging teenager grows up, I encourage her to take the lead regarding her origins, but also drop pebbles occasionally to prompt these conversations that she's ready to have, but may not think to start. So this means offering a conversation prompter and see if she engages. It could be something as easy as this. Well, tonight's Bronco game is about the Bears, is against the Bears. I wonder if George and Judy will be watching. And then you offer silence, which you do not fill. So you're leading sometimes and you're following sometimes. So the takeaway here is be ready over the years to start conversations that may go nowhere and to join conversations as well. Sometimes you'll lead and sometimes you'll follow. The 7th fundamental concept we need to cover is called normalcy. The way our family was built is one of many ways that people build their families. You're going to love this next slide. There's a snowflake mom who uses the metaphor of seeds to help her children understand the way their family was created. She says to them, a seed packet has lots of seeds in it, but sometimes the seeds are planted in different places. Some are planted in one garden, and others may grow in a different garden, one that wanted them dearly. In this garden here, we're connected because we are growing together, and our family is also connected to those other seedlings and that other garden. Do you see that both-and heart set playing out here? All 4 of our kids move back and forth between simply accepting their stories and not giving them much thought, to having questions as they piece things together. I had heart palpitations one day over the spontaneous question from one of my kids who asked, the dreaded question, so are you not our real mom? But I took a deep breath, and I recognized the question was not a malicious one. It was a curious one. Okay, this is attunement. And I was able to answer in an open and affirming way. We believe in telling the big picture story that the kids were always meant to land in our home, and it was a journey for all of us to end up in our garden together. I just really love that metaphor as a way to bring everything together. So the takeaway here is to neutralize any charge that you have about the way you became a family in order to best normalize it when talking with your children about it. This kind of goes back to that other point we had about dealing with your own stuff, which this mother did on the spot when the question of being the real mom came up. All of this can be summed up by advice from a snowflake's family who has 2 sets of twins, now tweens and teens. She says, every family created the environment to either allow safety and trust or kick them to the curb in family discussions regarding this, their kids' origins. And the kids will feel that environment from the start. When children know it's safe to ask these questions and families simply communicate how beautiful adoption is, they have no problems accepting it without shame. Of course, keeping in mind that their children's feelings about things will change over time, but reinforcing that no topic is off limits. We know that there is still a lot for our kids to piece together regarding their embryo adoptedness, but we help each of our kids get there individually and step by step. Our youngest is the most extroverted and has shown the most curiosity about her biological siblings, All 4 of them really appreciate having access to contact the donor for unique questions. I think that's well said. The last of our 8 fundamental concepts, it has to do with anonymity. We don't recommend that you move in the direction from open to closed, but we do realize that many have started somewhat closed and want to move toward openness. So what does it mean if, for example, you started out with an anonymous donor? Is all lost and should you just throw up your hands in despair now? No, that's not necessary, and here's why. Contact is only a piece of the equation, and it's not even the most important piece. It's a common mistake for people to confuse contact and openness, but really they're 2 very different things. I would bet that most of you, when you think of open adoption, have a construct in your head, something like this, a spectrum, where you have closed with no contact, maybe even no information on one side, and open, lots of contact, wide open on the other side. But if we're going to separate out openness and contact and deal with them separately, how we've always thought of this, let's pop this spectrum into a grid, and that's what this would look like. You can see that we're going to treat contact as on the horizontal axis, where you can have low or high, and we're going to look at openness or open-heartedness on the vertical axis, the height in here. And that gives us 4 quadrants on which we can figure out where we want to plot our parenting efforts. We'll take a quick tour through this. Box number 1, that's pretty easy to describe because that's typically what we think of in the closed adoption era. We have low contact and low openness. The kiddo, we were all kind of counseled, nobody will ever ask questions, we'll all just move on and pretend it didn't happen, and nobody will ever have any trouble. And if they do, we'll just push it down. That's box 1. Then we were told contact is really necessary, so let's move over to box 2. Let's have contact, but without actually working on openness. And openness I define as I told you, dealing with what is, but also openness is what we do within ourselves, and it's what we do between us and our child. Contact is what we do between us and the child's genetic parents. So in box 2, we might have this contact, but if we are also not aware of our own triggers and our own stuff, we are not going to be able to deal with our triggers when they come up, and we're not going to be able to help our kiddo be as effective helping our kiddos when they start having their own issues and wonderings too. We won't have that clear channel for them to come to us and feel like it's a safe place, because they might feel like get the message that they're dealing with our landmines. So let's flip that around and go to box 3. Here you find a lot of foster adoption situations, international adoption situations, anonymous donor situations, and this would be where there is no contact for whatever reason, but the parents here can still parent with high openness. A strong, clear channel between them and their kid, stuff that comes up, it can be dealt with in the open. Box 4 would be like almost a merging of families where there is high contact, high openness. And I want to point out that box 4 is not better than box 3 because you don't always have control over the contact. So you can control the elevation on this grid, and that's what I'm suggesting you do. Choose box 3 or 4 over box 1 and 2 by cultivating that mindfulness within yourself about what's going on, and by cultivating an open channel between you and your kiddo when they come to you with stuff that they're going on. What this would mean about anonymity is that you give what you do know. You approach things openly, you're honest with yourself and your child, and as we said earlier, DNA testing is making all sorts of connections possible over time. So what is closed today may not always be closed in terms of contact or knowledge. So the takeaway on this one, on anonymity, is this. Even if it's not possible for you to have identifying information or contact with genetic donors, you can still parent with openness. I delivered a workshop to a group of Chinese parents through Chinese adoption, and some of them were openly weeping to hear this message that they can still have openness even if they can't have contact. So I hope that does bring you some relief if you're dealing with an anonymous situation. So then let's talk a little bit about 2 of the most fearsome questions that parents may quake in their boots over. And you may notice that we have not spent, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to go into some consequences here first. As I've said, closedness versus openness. Closedness is where we live in denial of what is, and openness is where we live in acceptance of what is. So, as you're raising your child from day one or day to day, if you have a closedness mindset, your child is likely to get the message, this message. If my story is so bad we can't even talk about it, what does that say about me? If you choose to parent with more of this openness, dealing with what is, your child is getting the message, my parents and I can talk about the hard topics. Which would you prefer? I've got, let's see. I'm a little stuck here. Here we go. All right. Consequences of closedness. Your child may get the idea that I'm walking through this tough journey alone. I'm afraid to let my parents in. They can't handle it because they've got their own landmines. You can't hide the fact that you have landmines. You can deal with the fact that you have landmines, but if you can't hide it from them. Alternatively, if you're continually cultivating this channel with your child, they hear the message, my parents are here to support me wherever the journey may lead. I highly recommend a documentary called Closure. It's about a woman, a transracial adoptee named Angela Tucker, and the documentarian is her husband, Brian Tucker. And this young woman in her 20s decided to search for her birth family who lived in the Southeast. And at this point in time, she decided to make the trek from the Pacific Northwest to go see what she could find about them and maybe even meet them. And then the magical thing about this movie is that her parents and some of her siblings get in the van with her to go across the country. And that strikes me because, metaphorically, how would it feel for your child to know that you're on that journey with them? Literally, like Angela, you're on the journey with them. And what would it feel like for them to know that you're not on the journey with them, that they're alone? A third consequence of closedness is, and this is a big one, unacknowledged or unaddressed pain can lead to efforts to numb. Now, what do those efforts to numb look like? These look like eating disorders. These look like substance abuse. These look like self-harm. These look like suicide attempts. These look like sexual promiscuity. This is what happens when we push things down and don't deal with them. It doesn't mean they're not there. They're there and they do have an effect on us deep down below. But if we provide the atmosphere that our kids think they can deal with it, bring things up and let us help them deal with them, those things don't get stuck as often. Now, you can do all the right things and you can still have a bad outcome or a negative outcome, but I think it's worth trying to deal with things more in an open manner. Give your child a chance to bring things up with you and be on the journey with them. So now we're going to get to the question that parents have, how to live this out. We haven't spent the bulk of our time here talking about these specific questions. We've spent most of the time talking about the issues. And it has been my deliberate intention to help you build your own internal GPS system, orienting on true north, which is your child and not your fears, so that you can answer all of the many, many, many questions that will come up. The point I want to make here is that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have them ahead of time. You can't have them ahead of time. You just need a GPS system that orients on the right thing. If you have a parenting GPS that's oriented on truth and openness and on attunement, you will be able to find the answers in the moment, like that one snowflake's mother did that we talked about. Nevertheless, let's talk about two of the biggies. Two of the biggies might be, why didn't they raise me? And can I meet my genetic parents? Those might leave you quaking in your boots. So for the former, why didn't they raise me? With your GPS properly attuned, you might depersonalize, you'd normalize, you'd abide with your child, you'd drop a pebble. You might say that by chance the embryos that were left over when the other family was the right size just happened to be you. That was our good fortune. And it's normal for you to wonder what things might have been like if chance had gone the other way. I might wonder too, what do you think? And then you're quiet because you're walking alongside your child. For the latter question, can I meet them? Well, you'd search yourself for any of your own triggers about not being the only. You'd own your real value, your whole value as the real parent. You'd recognize the value of the genetic parent as also being real. You'd come up with the answer that lets your teen know you were on the journey with him, and you'd make sure that you were there beside him to focus on his fears and his insecurities, and not the other way around. So there they are, 8 things you need to know to answer the 2 most fearsome questions you may face from your adopted teen. There is no guidebook that can give you the answers, but with a well-tuned GPS system that is based on trust and relationship and connection, you will be able to handle whatever your teen's identity-forming journey brings.